Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast with me, Ben Talon, illustrator and creativity coach, founder of the Creative Condition, artist and writer. I bring 20 years of creative industry experience and a lifelong love of creativity, a fundamental pillar of human happiness, to you through ongoing personal exploration and the shared experiences of others. You'll get a nourishing mix of creative industry professionals and people far and wide using creativity in ways that can take our learning to the next level so we can maximise our unique blend. The show has been supported from day one by Illustration X, a tremendous illustration agency representing a shining global roster of illustrators and animators over at illustrationx.com. The music for the show is by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on all good streaming services. And for everything else, for my coaching, resources and inspiration, head to thecreativecondition.com.
Right, and pretending I'm talking to a couple and I'll say, how many hours do you spend together? They'll often look at each other like, we try to spend, an hour, and if we could find more time, we would love to spend more. And I say, okay, so there are 168 hours. So you spend 1 hour together Saturday afternoon for a walk. What do you mean you have to find time? Well, we've got our jobs, we've got our kids, we've got this, we've got that, and da-da-da. And again, it's not often until one person looks at the other and says, this is not working for me. This is not about finding time. This is about making an intentional decision about what it is that we value and how do we want to spend our time.
Today I'm joined by the fantastically talented psychotherapist Allison Heiliczer. Allison is author of Rethink the Couch, an amazing book digging into the psychology of relationships, the things we do to ourselves, the ways we cope in less than ideal situations. I thought this was a great one for the mental health series here on the Creative Condition. Hello guys, how you doing? Welcome to the show. My name is Ben Talon. This is the Creative Condition podcast. How are you? How's your week been? We are here again on Wednesday. Today I'm joined by the amazing Allison Heiliczer. We'll get into Allison's story in a moment, but first I got to thank the founding sponsor of the show. Been here since day one, helped me get the show off the ground. Illustration X, representing hundreds of the world's most talented illustrators and animators. Such a spread, such a range. You want it, they've got it. Murals, fashion illustration, beauty illustration, packaging, branding, design, advertising, live, you name it, it's on there. Check them out, illustrationx.com. Well, how have you been? I'm doing a little better this week. I was in a hole last week, an anxiety hole, and this kind of forms something of an opener for this conversation with Allison about chaotic brains. Now, you can interpret that however you wish. Allison will give you her interpretation in her story, which is really interesting at the top of this interview. For me, most weeks, it means that I'm able to swing like Mowgli between various creative vines, coaching, podcasting, writing, of course, illustration, my original baby. But last week I came a cropper. I hit one of those horrible periods of financial panic, somewhat unnecessarily, but as a freelancer, I know a lot of you will be nodding along and going, yep, I've got you, especially in this current climate of maybe the most uncertainty I've known since I started doing this. And I started in 2008, right after the, what do we call it, recession, credit crunch, the big short stuff and all that. But that's what happened. It all fell apart. I was just getting started, so I'd known nothing else. Maybe that's where you are. Maybe you're a tenacious little fucker coming into the industry now and going, yeah, and what? And skint all my life. This is nothing. Maybe. Don't know. That's kind of where I was. I used to get the panics back then, you see. I've always had them as a freelancer. But back then looked something like absolute pocket change rent, living with 3 other lads, sharing a studio with 4 other up-and-coming artists. And we weren't paying a lot. Those 2 costs combined, let me give some context. I'm not going to tell you my living costs now. But back then, my combined living costs for my studio rent and my house came in at under 200 quid a month. Believe that? It's unthinkable now. But that's where we are. So the panic was always there, but now I've got kids. Living costs are more than I've ever known, because I've got a house and all that. We are going to get into that with an upcoming guest in a few weeks, Charlotte Bradman. Charlotte is the author of The Happy Nomad. Brilliant book about something of a tumultuous life until Charlotte lost her house, was repossessed, and then went full-time living in a camper van. She'd been doing it somewhat already up until that point and had found happiness, but the commitment to that transformed her life. She's since brought out a book, very talented writer, qualified mindfulness therapist, but that's Charlotte, we'll get to that. But the point is, it's the relationship with yourself, it's the relationship with your people. My relationship with my wife Laura has helped me through this particular sticky patch. My relationships with my close friends has helped me out of a couple of sleepless nights last week, worrying about this stuff. It was Laura who sat down, made a plan with me, and helped me to realise that things weren't as bad as I thought they were in the midst of the panic. But the point is, this happens. This is something that Alison and I can both relate to. I'm not talking about financially because I don't know Alison's situation, but we're talking about the chaotic brains. That's what opens this conversation. We're going to talk neurodivergence. We're going to talk loneliness. We're going to talk about negative identities. We're going to talk about psychology during COVID and what that meant for people. Loneliness, isolation, finding time myth. This is a hell of a conversation. I love going outside of my comfort zone, as you know, and I came across Alison on LinkedIn and got in touch. Now, a few weeks later, I get this lovely letter in the post, handwritten, with a postcard from Singapore, where Alison's based. Here's her bio. Alison Heiliczer is an American psychotherapist who has been living in Asia for over a decade. She is the founder of Rethink the Couch and works with adult individuals and couples in Singapore and around the world. Heiliczer was former head of corporate psychology at OTNP's clinics in Hong Kong. While the hundreds of individuals and couples she has supported in clinical and private practice settings face various challenges, the common thread is they are navigating relationship and work issues. I won't read you the whole thing, but that you get the gist of it. That's why I wanted to talk to Alison, because I joined those dots. Those relationships, how we respond to ourselves, how we look in that relationship mirror matters so much for creativity. Through my coaching practice, I'm seeing that more and more now. I'm helping people to better understand and embrace themselves, their lived experience, their personality. Smash that together with their skills, their desires, their hopes, their fears, and you've got something powerful. But it takes trust and self-belief, and I lost a bit of that last week in a hole. But I'm feeling better again this week. I've done an awesome coaching session already this week. I've got another one booked up. I'd like to work with you. If you want to do that one-to-one, elevate where you are. Get on that path where you're in command of your creativity, your flow, your direction, your forward motion. Let's do it. We'll work through everything. I have a session called the Pit Stop. So one-to-one into everything with specific attention to your individual circumstances and the makeup of your creativity. From origin story through to current scenario, frustrations, blocks, hopes, fears, dreams. We go through all of it. We get into environment. We get into the body and the mind. We look at diet. We look at physical activity. The lot. Everything, or as close as you can get to everything that goes into creativity's makeup. And on the other side of it, after a 3 to 4 hour conversation, I go away, I listen back, I write up what is something between 15 and 20 pages of recommended notes, exercises, actionable advice points. If that sounds good, get in touch. We can work it out. Right, that's enough rambling from me. So, all that said, head to thecreativecondition.com for all the info. You'll find all the sections for coaching, podcast, and everything else. Right, let's get to it. This is my chat with the wonderful Alison Heiliczer. Enjoy.
So I've been in Asia for about 15 years working as a psychotherapist. So I work with people to support them through relationship challenges. So there are two groups of people I see. Couples, which is the primary work that I'm focused on at this point, and then individuals who have relationship challenges. So in the past, I used to work with people who had work challenges or relationship challenges, but as time has gone on, I've refined that only to be supporting people with relationship challenges. So that's my bread and butter. So day in, day out, what I'm helping people with is navigating the various challenges that come from either wanting to be in a relationship and not having that, to being in a relationship and wanting to go from good to great, or through navigating some of the challenges. And unfortunately, there are challenges that come after relationships, such as divorce, that I support people with, and kind of the aftermath. So all things relationship related, that's what I'm doing in the therapy room day in, day out. And I run a company, which is, my private practice, called Rethink the Couch.
Mm-hmm. And so there's two, we've been messaging for a little while now, since I stumbled across you on LinkedIn and loved the sound of your book. You very
Thank
kindly
you.
sent me the book along with some lovely little postcards from Singapore, which I still have showing off in my studio. I love them. But there's two things I really loved that I've really enjoyed through, being in touch with you. There's a real generosity and a warmth. You've gone way above any responsibility to help me with various bits along the way. And then we said it there, chaotic brain. There's chaotic brains when they come together. There's something magic there that happens. Those two things, were there things at what age in your life were you aware of these? And were they the foundational reason that you were drawn to the line of work that you do today?
Okay, so the chaotic brain did not get an official label of ADHD until I was in my 30s. So I think if we roll back the clock, so I'm going to separate these two things in terms of first going to the chaotic brain, and then we'll go to your very generous description of the warmth. So first things first with the chaotic brain. So, ever since I've been, I think, a little kid, people have described me as being, slightly eccentric or quirky. You can choose your word. And I never really thought much of it, right? Because we're all fish just swimming in our own waters. So I was going through life and I thought, you know what? There are some things that when I'm hyper focused on, I just can't get enough of. I want more. I want to do more of it, whatever the thing is. And that thing sort of changed and transformed as my life went on. But I always knew that the motivation that I had was highly correlated with how much interest I had in something. There were also times that I could not do things that were quite simple that other people could do very, very easily. The other thing that people would often describe me as is like being creative. And I think that came out of necessity, right? So without going too deep into my childhood, I think that there were times that I needed to be really creative to be able to kind of stay afloat and just make sure that I was kind of in enough survival mode that I could get through school, I could graduate, and I could start to take care of myself and live the life that I always wanted to have. So I think the idea of a chaotic brain, again, it wasn't fully kind of labeled, diagnosed till I was in my 30s, but I think from a very early age, there was some sense of like, I was kind of like listening to a different tune than a lot of other people. The beautiful thing about kind of being in that tribe of chaotic brains, right, is that once you find your people and once you kind of find your tribe and you find the work that really nourishes you, it can become a major asset. So I've had to work with it as a liability, and there are a lot of challenges that come with the chaotic brain, and it did from an early age, right? As I said, I struggled with a lot of things that for most people came very, very easily, and that has continued through my adulthood. So the chaotic brain, I'm very happy to kind of wear that as a label now, but it certainly has come with its struggles. In terms of the kind of warmth and generosity, I think that has come probably from various places, but I think what I'm going to do is probably start the story from when I'm 16. So when I was 16, and this is kind of how I opened the book. When I was 16, I moved from New York City to California. And I had the tremendous opportunity to work for a Japanese family called the Chino family in Southern California in a place called San Diego. And when I started working with them, what I saw, just like in so many different ways, was this kind of generosity that I just had never witnessed before. So every single day, at the end of the day, they would literally take all the fruits and vegetables that had not been sold from the farm. Okay. And this was a 200-acre farm in a beautiful part of San Diego called Rancho Santa Fe. And it was full of, gorgeous fruits and vegetables, Japanese varieties and otherwise. And at the end of the day, they would take all the fruits and vegetables and we would give them to people who didn't have enough basically to eat.
It's beautiful.
And the thing that Kazumi Chino, and may her memory be a blessing, she passed away a few years ago in her 80s. What she always used to say to me is, be generous with what you have a lot of. We have a lot of vegetables, so that's what we're generous with. And once you figure out what you have a lot of, just be generous with that. So for some people, that's going to come in the form of money. For some people, that's going to come in the form of their time. For some people, that's going to come in the form of their knowledge. The chinos were unique, right? That it came in the form of vegetables, like, Japanese pumpkins and strawberries and stuff like that. And so that always stuck with me, not just the words, but the actual witnessing of that kind of generosity, that it was an energy that you would give all, that you could give off into the world, right? That you wanted to open your heart and give whatever you had a lot of. But it was also through the action, which taught me a lot. So I would say that it was really at that point that my eyes opened, that there was something that I needed to figure out that I had a lot of. And I ultimately figured out it was really with the desire to support people. And as we started off talking, like, at first that started off with supporting people with work and relationship challenges. And what I've really figured out is that what I want to be generous with is supporting people with various, relationship challenges.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful, and I love that story. And just to jump in a little bit, Alison, I keep picking up like a little rumbling on your end. I don't know if it's like a table or something.
Probably, yeah.
But it's beautiful.
$3 earrings. You love them until you don't.
There's a bit from that story in the book that I made a note of here, and it's the kind of, you said you sort of built your practice on this, and it's curiosity, humility, creativity, and hard work. That's incredible. I love that distillation, because when you apply that to a lot of things, anything, I guess, in life, any pursuit, then you've got a framework there for something that's authentic and powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the things that, working with the Chinos really taught me was the importance of not just saying that I had a value system, but making sure that my choices aligned with what I said those values actually were. So if I'm going to run a practice called Rethink the Couch, right, and I'm going to say that I offer creative solutions, it's not enough, again, just in words to say that, but my choices every day when I show up to with people are to try to offer solutions, ideas that are creative. So when I tried to really distill, okay, what does the value system look like? Ultimately, I had to kind of take myself to task and say, okay, do my choices, both personally and professionally, actually align with what I say that what I want to value?
Mm-hmm. Is this something that like what role does this play in the problems of your clients? I know that's a broad question, but there's a note I made. It's the relentless pursuit of success. I'd love just to touch upon that a little bit. I'm not very educated on Asian culture, but you speak of the role of that in your book brilliantly, and I'm interested in that because I think that it removes so many people that in my world, in the creative industry, or even just, I guess, in business, people who set out with a sense of magic and something that gives them fulfillment. And invariably, it's either they get on the wrong ladder or they forget the reasons that they started doing it. It's very easy to do that because we live in a world of external validation.
Yes.
I'd love to just touch upon your observations of that in people and how you kind of help people in that regard to recognize those values in themselves that you mentioned there, which is a beautiful way of putting that. Is a part of your role to help people to recognize those values?
I think it's actually a central part of what I do. So the best way to learn about ourselves is to be in a relationship, right? A relationship is ultimately a mirror. So for better or worse, things are going to be reflected back to you that you may love and you want to claim. And there are other things that you really want to just toss to the side and kind of build something anew. So when I work with people with their relationships, what is so helpful is to actually have them be able to define what their values are. Because with that, Ben, that allows them again to figure out what do they do with their time, what kind of relationship do they really want to have, and who are the people that they really want to have in their life, right? Do they want to invite people in who have similar values, different values, and what does that look like? So, a lot of times, what happens with people in relationships is, they fall into it, they fall into the unconscious projection part of love, right? Which is the initial stage. And they think that the other person is just kind of perfect, right? And then they wake up one day and they realize that nobody is. They're not perfect. The person they're with is not perfect. And the people who ultimately are successful in relationships realize that perfection is not even the goal. So, helping people to define their values is understanding what makes them unique, what makes them tick, how do they want to spend their time, and again, what do they want their relationships to look like. Now, the unfortunate thing that sometimes does happen when people get clearer with their value system is that they ultimately have, a series of conversations. It's not usually a one and done, where they may come to realize that the person they're with has quite a different value system, quite a different value system. So in Asia, I see all types of relationships. So, we have arranged marriages, right, where people are told they're going to be marrying another person, and their value systems are typically an outgrowth of what their families tell them that they are, right? Mm-hmm. And so on paper, at least, we have two people who have kind of been vetted with their values, right, through their family system. But for a lot of people, right, who are kind of going down the path of a love marriage or love relationship, it can sometimes be a rude awakening to figure out that actually the value systems are quite different. And that is something that I work on with couples all the time, is figuring out which values they're willing to negotiate and which values they're not. And what I often see is that there's one draft of a value system pre-marriage. There's another version of this value system post-marriage. And then the real editing begins when the children arrive. Because then we talk about how religion informs value systems, how their family system, informs their value system, how their culture. So a lot of things that people didn't need to recognize as a value or didn't want to before getting married, before having kids, will often come to the surface when the kids come around. And even through, the period, if people go through a divorce, right? A lot of the fights happen to be around their difference in their values.
Yep.
Right? Around financial stability, around how the children are raised. So these are all outgrowths of values. And yes, when you're living in a place like Asia, right, just like, you in the UK or, in my home country in the United States, that there is a prescribed value system, right? Like people might not be aware of it. It might be, just sort of, again, swimming in those waters. But being in a relationship is often the pause that gets people to really start to define whether they want to claim that value system as their own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was particularly interested in negative identities, you termed it as, and I was very fortunate in that I grew up in a household with a mother who was very, very, don't know if eccentric, but anyway, a very real character.
Yeah,
always encouraged me to sort of be, don't listen to what, if I like to wear something, wear it. If I like to do something, do it, and don't listen to the rides of others. And very fortunately for me, I met a group of friends when I was 14, and it pulled me out of that kind of just getting along and just fitting in at school. These guys were just they were outward with their emotions, which I, growing up in a kind of mill town in Yorkshire in the late 80s, early 90s, wasn't so common, certainly not in the family dynamic. And what that gave me was this immediate sigh of relief and ability to go, oh, okay, this is a good thing that, these have all got strong traits. What are my strong traits? And they help me to bring out something way earlier than a lot of people find a way to do that, because society has a way of
Yes.
boxing that off. And what that meant is, by the time I walked into art college at 17, I was wearing the ridiculous clothes. I was happy to go in there and be comfortable with what I wasn't. So that's why I was really interested in this concept of negative identities,
Yes.
and with particular interest to Asia, the example you gave of Dragon Boys, which, if you wouldn't
Yes.
mind just explaining that, and also just a little more about your work with negative identities, because I think that is so key to people who want to do something that is a reflection of self or is innate in them.
Yeah, it's first of all such a beautiful, I think, story that you just shared, Ben, about your own development, because I think it highlights that, a lot of times when people think about their identity, they go down one of two extremes, right? They think, I have to just be myself, right? And I call this in the book authenticity at any cost, right? It's like what my country, my home country, the US, like we're great at this. We're great at exporting this extreme idea of individualism. It's all me, 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 right? And that's all I should care about. So when people are thinking about their identity, they often think about it's all just about me, right? I should just, like dance to my own tune, do whatever I want, wear whatever clothing I want, like forget what the world tells you. And then there's this other extreme. So now I've sort of, I found myself living in a context for the past 15 years. It's almost the other extreme from my home country, which is this identity is often prescribed through a collective value system, right? So it's actually not about me. It's not about the shirt that I want to wear. It's about how do I preserve the harmony of the group? How do I make sure that I'm not the nail that sticks up and gets hit the hardest? So you just told this beautiful story, right? Where on the one hand, you had this very influential voice, perhaps one of the most influential voices one can have, which is your mother telling you, beat to your own drum, right? Like just keep dancing to whatever tune is making you happy, wear the shirt, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you got to experience what it was like to be in a group of people. And it sounds like they provided a permission structure for you to be able to express your emotions, right? And then with that, within a group setting, you realize that, yes, expressing yourself can be great, but very likely, if you're going to retain membership in this group, even if it's an unofficial membership, there has to still be a consideration of the group. So the focus cannot just be, what is Ben feeling or what is this other guy feeling? But there has to be this negotiation of the space. So I love the story because it brings together the individual and collective forces that shape our identity. Now, with the negative identity, what happens a lot of times, and this connects actually with people's value system, is that when they're going through this process that therapists will often refer to as individuation, which is a mouthful, but it basically just means when you're starting breaking away a little bit from the family, from the nuclear system, and figuring out, who am I, right? What makes me tick? What happens a lot is that when people are starting to define what is the self, right? Or on a deeper level, connecting with the soul, right? They'll often speak in a negative way. I am not like my mother in this way. I will never be like my father in that way. I don't want to be like my sister or brother in that way. I will not do what that teacher told me to do. So that's often the first step, right, in that evolution towards understanding what is your value system. And again, being able to negotiate between the individual desires and needs, and also recognizing that to be really a part of society in any meaningful way, that will get negotiated with the collective, that will get negotiated with the group. It's just a matter of degree. Right. And yes, there are hermits. There are people who like absolutely are like, I'm opting out of collective systems, but even they don't go unscathed, right? Even they have some connection to something, more powerful than just the individual. So if we get back to the negative identity, I see this a lot often, even with couples and people who are dealing with relationship challenges. I don't want the marriage that my parents had. I swore I would never become the parent that my father was. And through that, what I actually often will suggest that people do is literally a brain dump on a piece of paper. And I say, get out all the stuff you're not. I want to hear everything. I want to hear everything down to the details of like, I will not serve my kids this specific breakfast cereal because it used to make me so angry when my parents would serve me this breakfast cereal, right? So, like, you can get down in the weeds, you can stand back up and be more general, but tell me everything you're not. And then what I have them do is literally draw an arrow on another side of the piece of paper and say, okay, what do I think this tells me that I am? So, can you basically alchemize the negative identity into something that starts to feel solid and starts to feel like it is resonant with who you are? So the negative identity piece is very important for most people going through that process. And it is mostly a process of alchemizing the things that you reject that lead you towards the deeper acceptance of who you are.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And have you noticed, you reference cultures where toxic norms are ingrained in the book. Have you noticed change in these recent times? I'm interested in the pandemic shift because it was a really surreal time for everybody that was affected by it. There were many upsides, I think, where people were, had to look in the mirror a little more, or had to take that pause that might not have otherwise taken it. And then on the other hand, obviously, it was completely horrendous. So talk to me about that a little bit, because I found your observations of that very much lined up with my observations of it.
Yeah. So, yes, people participate in all sorts of toxic behaviors. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is the collective participation in a lot of these behaviors, right? So like the agreement to kind of all be workaholics, right? Or, drinking too much altogether, or, going on the work trips and just kind of all participating in this, collective pursuits of all sorts of behaviors. So yes, there are many, many toxic behaviors you can find in all corners of this earth. And as it relates to the pandemic, so, when it was the pandemic, I was still living in Hong Kong and I was working obviously as a healthcare worker at that point. And so it was really a point of reckoning for a lot of people. And I want to just be very clear that my point is not to glorify that time period.
Of course.
Because we saw awful things around the world, right? With people dying, very quickly, children, getting sick, horrible, horrible things. So I just want to make that very clear that on balance, I don't look at the period and go, I'm so glad that happened, because too many people died, too many people suffered. Having said that, there were a lot of people who, during that time period, went in one of two directions. So for some people, the kind of what we're referring to as toxic behavior, actually, they became more entrenched in it. It became not just something they were participating in collectively because other people were doing it or because it was habitual, but also because it became a form of self-medication. So I saw a real big uptick in people drinking. I saw a really big uptick in terms of people who, wanting to make very rash decisions about their life because, of course, at that point, we didn't know if the sky was actually falling. So people felt that existential pressure to make, those decisions. On the other hand, in a positive way, there were a lot of people who started to realize that health is not something that you can kind of segregate into different body parts, right? And you can't even segregate really mental and physical health. So there were a lot of people who really started to opt out of a lot of these toxic behaviors because they wanted to fortify their systems and make sure that they were, physically as strong as they could be. there were also people who, were working from home all the time and spending more time with their children or their spouses than they ever had, and actually would tell me, hey, you know what, I actually like my wife or husband, or you know what, it's kind of cool to hang out with my kids. So again, it
Mhm.
was overlaid. I mean, where I was in Hong Kong with, we had particular stressors there. So I think on the whole, people were very stressed. But I think in both directions, yeah, I saw both. So I saw people getting more entrenched in kind of some of the toxic behaviors and again, self-medicating and making very kind of impulsive decisions. And I also saw people who saw it as a massive pause and who really had their eyes open to how precious life was and how meaningful the relationships that were already in their life really were, and started to pay attention to that more.
Yeah, yeah, because it was completely surreal in that regard. Yeah, like you said, there's this mass confusion and fear, of course. And then you said all these terrific things happening, but I'd see little moments of community along the way that had somewhat been lost.
Yes. Yes.
Uh, People were, I remember there was an old guy on our street, and everyone through the WhatsApp group made sure that we all put a hamper together for Christmas to make, just to acknowledge that we were thinking of him, even though we
Yes.
couldn't be together at Christmas. Little
Yes.
gestures like that, because we were kind of in one place,
Yes.
even though we couldn't legally see one another, we're sort of, we're big. And actually, I think
Yes.
reminded us actually of how destructive loneliness and isolation can be.
I think probably one of the most destructive forces is that sense of loneliness. And what I see, Ben, is that a lot of times when people are not in relationships, they think, oh, relationship is the cure for loneliness. And that would make sense logically, right? You would say, okay, what's the antidote to being lonely? It's to be in relationship. But actually, some of the loneliest people I see are actually in unhealthy relationships. So because I deal with a whole range of marriages, right? So again, I'm not always just seeing people for challenges. I'm seeing people who, want to go from, as I said earlier, good to great. But I also see a lot of people in marriages and relationships who are incredibly lonely. They're with people who have an active addiction and they don't even feel like they're with that person. They're with someone who, is unfaithful and they feel incredibly lonely. So the loneliness is a tremendously detrimental factor in our health, not just mental health again, but our physical health. And it's the antidote is not just being in a relationship, it's being in a healthy one.
Yeah, and this makes me join the dots back to the values thing too, because that can
Yes,
create that similar divide. And
very much.
I recently went to a festival called Paradiso in Mexico that I was speaking at and had written a book for,
Mm.
and it was incredible. Now Hector Ayuso, who founded the festival, he's spent the last 24 years running the world's biggest design festival out of Barcelona called Off Festival, and he stepped away to take on this new challenge in Mexico. Now
Yeah.
Hector he had there was some real troubling times in his childhood. Learned this through writing his biography. But what Hector thrives on is bringing all those people with common values together in a room, and
Together.
doing that in a
Yes.
really interesting, creative way, not so formal. Part of the reason he stepped away from Off was because Off was hugely successful, but they had reached a point where everyone's eyes were on the stage and not the person next to them. That's what he wanted to
Yes.
bring back with this new, smaller iteration. But when I came away from that, there were so many invigorating conversations and so many people from all over the world that just thrived from one another's companies and values and sense of passion for creativity. That what I did, and it's an exercise I've started helping my coaching clients with, is physically pen and paper draw this universe of people that I belonged
Mm.
to and with. And that was the most nourishing feeling because, I work out of my garden in a little studio, and I'm fortunate to have two small children and a lovely wife that I share values with. So I don't feel lonely other than some days when I'm not filling my work and I'm in the
Sure.
garden. That's a common day to day thing. But to try to offset that a little more, I thought, how can I take these people with me in a sense that they're not physically there, but I know that I'm with these people and I
Yes.
share. And it's changed my whole approach because what I've done is far less time scouring LinkedIn or sending emails out to people, cold to people. and more time just arranging calls to catch up with these people, or if they're close enough, a coffee or a beer or whatever that might look like. And it's been a big turning point this year. I feel way more connected again,
Yes.
realigned with those people. And now I get my coaching clients to do the same thing, just to recognize that they are a part of this contemporary scene right now with all these people that empower them. And I just find it incredibly sad that people can go through life without ever feeling that, you
Yes.
know. I don't quite know where I'm going with the question on that, but maybe that leads me towards the finding time myth, which I'd love to talk to you about, because
Yeah.
I had to make an effort to bring time back in to do that on the other side of Paradiso, because my younger self would have got back to the studio, fallen right back into the digital habits that I'd created that were cutting me off somewhat from physical
Yeah.
and one-to-one interaction. So, the world is a crazy pace out there. The world is full of people who don't have time to think. I'd love to. What's your experience of the finding time myth? Because it's a real thing, isn't it?
It is definitely a real thing. And it's a real thing, I think, for all of us, right? Is this idea that we have to find time to be able to do certain things. And the reality is, Ben, that this actually does very much connect with values, because you and I are supposed to meet today at 9 a.m., right? In the UK, 4 p.m. Singapore time. So we arranged this meeting, right? Because we value the time together, and we've committed to it, and we're going to value this conversation, hopefully. But the thing is that if something had happened before this call to any one of our kids, right? And between the two of us, we've got four. If anything had happened to one of those kids or our spouses, or something had broken your house or in my apartment, or there had been something, we would find time to reprioritize the way that our day looked like, right? So you might say, okay, earlier today, do you have time to fix something in your house or do something with your kids? And you say, no, I have this podcast recording, or I have this, that. But the moment that one of our core values really becomes threatened, or it comes to the surface that something needs to get done, most of us will, quote, find time, right? So I have no doubt that if, God forbid, something had happened to one of your kids or something in your house that was an emergency, you would find time immediately to make sure you were investing in what mattered most. So a lot of times people learn this lesson that finding time is a myth through something like an emergency or something urgent, right? They never had time to take care of their health until they got a terrible medical diagnosis. But guess what? Once they get the diagnosis, they'll often, quote, find time. So unfortunately, including myself many times, right, it's come to the surface that, we tell ourselves a story, we're busy, we're busy, we're busy, until something happens, and then we need to kind of find time. So why do we do this? For some of us, it's to feel special, right? Because the idea of being so busy means that we're involved in so many things, and so we want to feel, special and important. I think it's just something we've heard other people say over and over again. So again, back to swimming in these waters, I think that's living in productive contexts. We just hear people say stuff like that. But it is a myth. Now, as it connects with the values, as it connects with my work with relationships, what I'll often say to people is, look, you have 168 hours in the week, right? And pretending I'm talking to a couple, and I'll say, how many hours do you spend together? They'll often look at each other like, oh, we try to spend, I don't know, an hour. And if we could find more time, we would love to spend more. And I say, okay, so there are 168 hours. So you spend 1 hour together Saturday afternoon for a walk. What do you mean you have to find time? Well, we've got our jobs, we've got our kids, we've got this, we've got that, and da da da. And again, it's not often until one person looks at the other and says, this is not working for me. This is not about finding time. This is about making an intentional decision about what it is that we value and how do we want to spend our time. Now, the finding time, myth, the one asterisk I would put on that is for people who are truly in survival mode. Okay, so the way that I'm speaking now, I have worked with people who are genuinely in survival mode, like refugees off the boat, Okay. I'm not going to
Mhm.
tell them that finding time is bullshit or that it's a myth. So there are people out there who genuinely I would not have this conversation with because I would obviously find it patronizing and irrelevant. But for many of us, it's a story we tell ourselves to feel important, to feel special because we've heard other people say it. So we just copy paste what other people, think and don't pause to consider what we really think or believe. It's not often until something urgent or an emergency comes about that we reassess this. But how we spend our time is an absolute reflection of what we really value. And just as an example, it's like we talk about this value thing. So people will often say, like, I don't know what I value. Could you like send me a list of values? And I'll never do that because what I say to them is, look, you could Google, and now with AI, I mean, AI maybe could even tell you what your values are, right? But you could Google list of values and just circle what you think are your values. But what I say to people is like, first of all, there's tremendous pressure to circle certain values. So most people want to see themselves as kind, respectful people, right? So right off the bat, people will circle certain things. So what I say to people, and this relates to the finding time myth, is I want you to send me your diary from the past week. And then I will try to download what I think your values are based on how you spend your time. And you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. And it's often very revealing because then I'll send this back to people and I'll say, okay, you value work, you value this, you value that. And they'll say, no, 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 I really value my family. And I'll say, okay, that's interesting because I actually don't see any time on this diary that has to relate to spending time with your family. So what is it? Oh, I have to find time. Things are so busy. I have all these projects. So that's how this all kind of links and reinforces each other is that we tell ourselves a story. It's not often until it's almost too late or it is too late to reassess and figure out what to do with our time. But for anyone listening who's like, as a first step, want to figure out what they value, not in an intellectual way by circling things, because you'll circle things based on what you think you should say, pull out your diary from the last week. And from that, distill how are you spending your time? And are you spending a time in a way that is meaningful and that is in a way that you are choosing to spend your time that way as opposed to finding time, which is often, code for victim speak.
Yeah, which again, I love the term mystical victimhood, and all of this makes me think of a beautiful. It's a term from a Japanese philosopher that I heard called it's a Seikatsu Sha, which is being the author of your own life, and I
Mm.
think it roughly translates into those who live by doing, and I love that
Yes.
because when I invariably going back to the kind of the chaotic brain thing, I hit periods of overwhelm because I get too hungry for the next
Yes.
challenge. I overload
Yes.
myself, a very common thing. I think there's a lot of, particularly in the creative industry, there's a lot of neurodivergent people. It
For
goes
sure.
hand in hand with creativity.
Yes.
Um, and I like to ground myself with that, just to sit and reflect on that for a moment and remind myself that actually, this is my story. I am in charge of this. And actually, as you said there, with restructuring and refocusing on the things that truly matter and being brave enough to eliminate some of the things that don't, even if that brings a period of discomfort, it's an amazingly empowering thought exercise, but also something you have to live. And when I start to retake the reins, I saw it said by a guy in my industry recently saying you have to design the career you want to live because if you don't, somebody else will design it for you. It will be
For
designed
sure.
externally, and therefore you will become resentful, bitter. You will lose time. I just find all of that very interesting and very powerful.
I think it's tremendously powerful and so is true with our relationships, right? If we don't consciously pause and ask how are we spending our time, which again is an extension of what we truly value, it is typically copy paste off of a template that we downloaded from somebody else, which is not always a bad thing because there's often value, right, in kind of understanding, other people's paths. But I do believe there's real empowerment in that pause and saying, okay, so if I don't work to create this, it will be created for me. Now, I put an asterisk on the finding time thing. I'll put an asterisk on this as well, which is designing relationships, designing an intentional life. To me, is not the same as like I control my life or I control my destiny or I control the outcome of my relationships. Because I have seen people who are incredibly intentional, who are incredibly wise about how they're spending their time and are super clear about their values. They're great people who are trying their best in relationships. And sometimes the outcome is not what they were hoping for. So being intentional, pausing, all great so that you don't wake up at 80 and think, oh my gosh, I'm living a life that doesn't belong to me, right? Or you're not kind of riddled with, endless regrets, but it is not the same thing as control. And so the mystical victimhood thing that you mentioned, it's often a term because I see so many people, right, who are having affairs, right, active affairs, or they're out of an affair, and that's a term that when I ask people about kind of how it came to be that they were in this affair, right, because one of the chapters in the book is you don't bump into people naked. Yeah, so it didn't just happen. So walk me through how the hell did this happen? And what I often will get is a tale of what I call mystical victimhood. It happened to me, Allison, right? So they're passive characters. It happened to me and it had to happen to me. There's often this very mystical sort of tinge to the whole story. So it doesn't just apply to cheating, but in the book, and often kind of in the work that I'm doing, that's one of the tip-offs that people are kind of living in that overwhelmed victimhood state, but they will often apply something kind of magical or mystical to the whole thing. Like, it's just happening to me. There's absolutely nothing I can do.
Mm-hmm. And you're right. I love that differentiation between intention and then the sort of external things, because it's the nature of life. I watch. I don't know if you've seen the movie Stutz with Phil Stutz. It's a movie about Phil Stutz, a psychotherapist based in LA, and it was made by Jonah Hill. He
Oh,
basically
yes, I
wanted
did
to,
see it. Yes.
yeah, to
Yes, I
share the
did see
thing.
it.
He
Yes.
acknowledged that he was in a position to afford this. The level that Phil
Yes,
Stutz is working at.
that's
But
right.
what one major takeaway that I took from that film was the three constants of life being pain, uncertainty, and constant work. And again,
Yes.
it's quite cathartic to consciously acknowledge that, to caveat the intention, because I think for me the intention was always whatever comes my way, I can respond in a way that
Yes.
is in line with those values we talked about, and therefore, there's always things outside of my control. And the older I get, I have dips, but I start to get better at letting things go that I can't immediately affect. And I do. I think once you recognize those three things, I think it can open up a lot of doors in your life for moving forward with the right kind of flexible intention.
I think it's beautiful to draw that distinction. And I think for people who have children, you learn this lesson very, very quickly and very painfully often that you can't control children. You can't control your partner. You can't control the outcome. The best you can do is show up as intentionally as possible. You can set consequences, right, for yourself or other people if they don't follow through on things. But the control thing is a total illusion. And we see that as various times throughout life. And it's such an important lesson of do everything you can to be intentional, to be awake, to pause, to blow up this myth that you have to find time or that, you're just a victim, that things are happening to you. So go full force on that. And in the same breath, recognize that the control is a total illusion.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I had a friend on the other week, was when I was having a bit of a moment, was reminding me. They said, "Look, you lean into the chaos. That's what you've always done, and here you are, 18 years into a career. It hasn't led you astray so far. So stop freaking out and remember." And it was good. It did snap me out of it somewhat, which was lovely. Um, I love the idea of changing from trying to committing as well, which again is in line with this intention.
Yeah.
And again, it's that thing, and also with the sort of finding time. Also, it's small steps. Every coaching client I've worked with so far will invariably be disconnected from what I term their emotional creativity, which is the
Oh,
stuff they
yes.
want to make because they feel it, as opposed to
Yes,
the
yes.
intellectual creativity that clients bring us. I adore my clients. I love the parameters of a brief, but in my world, I always place great value on making the time, and that might be, I start incredibly small, embarrassingly small. I say, look, can you make 20 minutes one night a week? Everyone kind of, sometimes reluctantly will go, yeah, I can. I say, okay, show up, doesn't that, if we're talking in the realms of emotional creativity, that might just be reading a book you wanted to read and you haven't found time for. Might be making a
Yes.
sketch. It might be writing a line of poetry on the notes app in your phone on the bus home from work. But if you start there, you change your mindset into something that slowly becomes a habit, and you see the world differently because you're making this stuff that you've told yourself you don't have the time to make.
For
And
sure.
this feeds into not just, of course, not just creativity, but I think that switch over from trying to committing is a great feeling when you start to take a
It
couple of
is.
small steps. Is this something that
Yes.
they, in regards to you and your clients, is this something that this must feel great to you if you see a client start to take those small steps and actually commit to an idea?
For sure. And so, sometimes like especially in the context of couples work, people will ask for all sorts of changes to occur, right? All the way from teeny tiny to great big huge changes. And what often comes out of the other person's mouth is, I'll try,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'll try to make those changes. And what I'll often say to the person is, do you try to brush your teeth?
Mm-hmm.
You don't try to brush your teeth. You pick up the damn toothbrush or you don't,
Yeah.
right? You get in the bathtub or you don't. You don't try to do these things. So, what is this trying kind of about? And what often, comes out is that the committing is great, but there is something quite vulnerable about it, right? So if you stay in that space of trying, you get all sorts of passes, right? Oh, I tried to do this today. I tried to do that tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. So there's sort of this very abstract timeline, right? There's no containment and there's no vulnerability, right? But if you commit to doing something, you may actually end up failing. And that's very risky for people. So I think that's often what stuffs people up. So it's something for sure that I see in the context of my work, especially with couples, right? Is this idea of I'm going to try to find time. I know other people can, but I can't. So I'll try. But to see the small shift even to commitment is huge. And you know what? What I'll often do, Ben, is like try to lower the bar as much as possible to get people to understand the feeling of committing and following through.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, okay, I want you to spend 20 more minutes together as a couple today. And people say, no, it's too much, we don't have time, blah, 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 all that stuff. So I go, okay, how about 10 minutes? Well, we could try to do 10 minutes, but I don't know. Okay, how about 5 minutes? How about 1 minute? Right. And so sometimes what I'll do is I'll kind of play along a little bit with this finding time thing, because what I often find is it's actually not about that. Because if you tell me you don't have one more minute a day to call your wife, to text her, to talk to her, to hug her, we have much bigger problems than we thought we did when you walked in this room. So I will often not get into a bar fight over how big is the commitment? But what I'll do is I'll often try to just get it down to something super, super, super teeny tiny and see what the person does with it. Mm. Because at that point, as I said, we may have a bigger problem than we thought we did at the initial start. There may be some resistance, right, which we need to figure out why it's there. Or it may be that I'm suggesting you do something, your spouse is suggesting you do something, your boss is suggesting you do, just pick the person, and you actually don't want to do it. So you say you'll try, but deep down, you actually don't care if it's 1 more minute a day with your spouse or 20 minutes. You actually don't want to do the thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'll often kind of play with.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that so much. And getting right down to it is then, because it forces the person then to really, to acknowledge that does this mean something to you? Really? It's the last thing I want to chat to you about because I'm aware of time, but beautiful sentence in your book, creativity is a hallmark of neurodivergence. And I've been doing this show now for 10 years, and the latter half of doing this has been increasingly not characterized by, but there's a really strong thread of this. I see it more. The more I become aware of neurodivergence, which I find absolutely fascinating, then that sentence really spoke to me because it's, many people are learning more all of the time. This is a rising conversation. I think we're in a real period of revelation in that regard. Speak to me about that a little bit, if you could, about, what do you see between neurodivergence and creativity?
I think there's a huge connection. And I think it's, for some people, not necessarily even something that they wear as a badge of honor. I think there are some people who actually see the creativity as quite painful. They needed to be creative to be able to fit into a world that they don't feel that they fit into. So for some people, it's really an extension of some exuberance, some passion that they have, right? And obviously, by definition, if your brain is neurodivergent, it means that likely you may not have certain inhibitions that other people do, which can be amazing for creativity, right? I mean, when I said, that's it, I want to write a book, it's like, boom, just that's it, I'm writing the book. So, which is something that a lot of people say, but maybe they don't actually, get to do. So for some of us, it can be like, wow, we can like really think outside the box. We can really feel alive with our creativity. You can feel like just this sense of exuberance, as I said, and passion. But I do think there's a bit of a dark side to the creativity as well, which is that it's often something that people need for survival. Right? They'll sometimes, for example, have to be creative in how they mask themselves so that they seem neurotypical, right? So they creatively have to think about how do they bend and flex in this world and in their interactions with people to seem recognizable. And they have to creatively make their way through workforces or through schools that they don't actually feel connected with. So the creativity, like most things, there's a light side, as I said, which is like breakthroughs. I've met great people who, are salespeople or, in certain artistic, industries who just have these big ideas and they just go for it, right? Because as I said, they're like, they don't realize that other people don't think like this. But for some people, their creativity, it feels more connected to that darker shadow side of needing to creatively almost figure out how to not be themselves.
And that's exhausting, isn't it? Because not only are you going against what is your natural self, but the energy required, because that was going to bring on anxiety, hyper awareness. There's so many things that are so taxing there mentally that carrying that on a day-to-day basis. Oh my word.
I think exhausting, I think you nailed it, is the right word for a lot of people, that they almost wish that they didn't need to be so creative. But for other people, as I said, it fills them up.
Yeah.
And for a lot, it's both. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's incredible, Alison. I learned so much from you, as I have from your book, which it's already on my creative condition reading list. But where can people,
thank you.
Is that widely available still? Where can people grab that, and where can people connect with you?
Yes, it is still widely available. So you can go to Amazon.com. So depending where you're listening, it might be available in a local bookstore. But as always, probably Amazon.com is the most reliable. And you can also visit rethinkthecouch.com, which is my website for my personal practice. But I also have some links to ordering the book on the website as well.
Tremendous. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Big thank you to Allison Heiliczer for taking the time to talk on this week's edition of the Creative Condition podcast. If you're new to the show, welcome. I hope you enjoyed that as a first blast. It's a taste of the range that I get here. I love to bounce between practitioners in the arts and in design and in film and all the usual suspects, but then just run off and grab an athlete or a psychotherapist in today's example, or I'd have an astronaut on the show if I could. You know what I mean? Give me some suggestions. I'll go for it. Always learn more about creativity if you go far and wide, and that's the goal here, to flesh out our understanding of it so we can maximise ours, find our unique voice in these times of automation. So I hope you enjoyed Allison. I thought that was a really fantastic dive into the relationship mirror. It's so important, isn't it? How we get along, not just in our romantic relationships, but, with our friends, with our clients. There's so much going on about self-value. It's really critical. So I hope that's going to help to flesh out this ongoing series of episodes on specific areas of mental health, because Lord knows we need it in this day and age. You can grab Allison's brilliant book, Rethink the Couch. My copy is completely dog-eared and got pencil marks everywhere in it. I've read it a few times now. First for researching his podcast, and I've gone back to it countless times because it's really, really valuable resource. So check it out. You can find that all around. You can find Allison's practice, as she mentioned there, rethinkthecouch.com. Fantastic human. Cheers for doing it. Cheers for listening, guys. If you do get a second, please tell a friend about the show. It's really valuable. Click that subscribe, or even rate and review would be wonderful too. Any of that stuff is a really big help. I do this on my own. I produce the whole thing, as if you can't tell, they're thinking. And I love it, and I'll be doing it in some capacity for a long, long time. I love doing this, love supporting creativity, so please do take that step, that little action to help the show if you can. Big thank you to the founding sponsor of the show. Wouldn't be here without them, illustrationx.com, representing some of the globe's most awesome illustration and animation talent. Check them out, illustrationx.com. And please do consider supporting the Ukrainian Institute, a brilliant organisation helping the Ukrainian creative community during this awful time of war. Check them out, ui.org.ua. Just share some work. If you can commission someone, even better. But just have a look. Spread the word. Help these guys out. They need it more than you could ever know. If you want to work directly with me, let's talk coaching. The pit stop session has been popular this year. I want to do more. I want to get people booked in. There are slots across September and October and November. So get in touch. Let's do it. If you're southwest based, maybe I'll meet up with you. Maybe even Manchester. I've got friends and family up that way. Maybe even Yorkshire. I love doing these in person. We find a cafe. We sit down. We talk between 3 and 4 hours. Sometimes we need 2 cafes. Maybe even a pub. I've taken clients to bookshops at lunch just to get a sense of what they're drawn to. We go that deep. It's a personal, intimate process. But by the end of it, the hope is that I get you back on track with some actionable points for getting back in tune with that flow, that magic, that forward motion on the path you want to be taking your creativity. If that sounds good, head to thecreativecondition.com/coach. Otherwise, have a great week, and cheers for listening, guys. Take care. Stay creative.